Morning. I'm Joyce Tischler, Worship Associate today. Today's service is titled Roots and Wings, and that's a theme that we're going to be hearing more about this year. And for me, roots and wings are very personal symbols. Roots are essential. They tell me who I am and where I belong. They form the base of my identity, and they enable me to grow in spirit and in substance. And I have several different kinds of roots. I have geographical roots, religious and spiritual roots, roots that have formed and shaped my political and social values. I grew up in New York City, and there I yearned for deeper roots. I felt that I was surrounded by concrete buildings, concrete streets, and millions of people who seemed to be rushing everywhere all the time. I felt unconnected to the earth. And in my religious home growing up, the Jewish synagogue, it always seemed foreign language, uninviting, too set in its ways for my developing mind. So from a young age, I wanted to leave that place and those self-limiting roots. So I moved to California, which felt like a homecoming, more open, more inviting. Places like Yosemite, Big Sur, Tahoe, the California coastline. California is where I discovered the UU Church and all that it offered to me. I grew roots to that place and those people, and I still love that home dearly. Moving to Oregon 5 years ago was difficult because I had to let go of that church, had to let go of the Bay Area, which had been my home for over 40 years. That's where I met my husband and married and raised my daughter. That's where my career was. It's where I planted myself very deeply, intending never to leave. But when the opportunity arose to teach at Lewis and Clark, I left my soul home. I left my UU church, my friends, my community, even my identity as a proud Californian, and all of that brought me great sadness. I visualized myself as a plant that was hanging in midair, being held up, torn away from its life-giving soil and the nutrients that fed it. Its roots were exposed for all to see. And growing new roots here in Oregon has been a slow process. But finding and becoming part of this church has enabled me to feel connected, to feel that I'm planted once again, and that I have regained the balance that you get from having roots. Wings are also important to me. They symbolize my ability to be strong and creative and take risks. And throughout my life, this may sound strange, but maybe not, I've had a recurring dream that I can fly. Okay. In my dreams, I'm flying about 50 feet above the ground, nothing too crazy. But I glide easily and confidently, and I look down, and often I see the street where I grew up, but also I see the larger earth and all of its beauty, the trees, the hillsides, the valleys, rivers, houses, roads. I imagine myself with wings, and this has enabled me to take risks and be patient with the fear that comes with taking those risks. I've learned to live into new experiences that are scary, experiences that are uncomfortable. In my dreams, I don't crash. I soar like a bird, and I see the beauty of the world as I glide up there. After my husband, John, died in 2003, I joined a grief support group, and it was an important part of my healing process. When the group was coming to the end of its final session, we were asked to visualize ourselves. And I was surprised because I visualized myself standing on a cliff, overlooking a beautiful green valley and getting ready to fly. Even though I still felt damaged and vulnerable, I was ready to at least begin to imagine living again. I was able to see that there could be warm, sunny days and soft winds of hope. This church offers me both the roots and the wings, the roots that help me stabilize myself, the wings that I can rely on to take off in new and exciting directions. It might seem improbable that one place, one community, housed in a 100-year-old Pepto-Bismol colored building with beautiful stained glass Jesus windows can offer me both roots and wings, but it does. This community gives me both a safe place and the inspiration to explore what lies ahead. And for that, I am deeply grateful.
Our reading today is from the poet Wendell Berry, and this is called The Larger Circle. We clasp the hands of those who go before us and the hands of those who come after us. We enter the little circle of each other's arms and the larger circle of lovers whose hands are joined in a dance, and the larger circle of all creatures passing in and out of life who move also in a dance, to a music so subtle and vast that no one hears it except in fragments. How many of you have ever heard of the Presbyterian Church at Willamette Falls? How about the First Congregational Society of Oregon City? First Congregational Church of Oregon City? How about Atkinson Memorial Congregational Church? How about Atkinson Memorial Church? Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Willamette Falls. All of those titles are names that this congregation has gone by in our 180 years of existence, right? They are all a part of the deep roots of this congregation, which is, of course, also nurtured and defined by the land upon which we rest. Land that was central to the Clackamas Chinook peoples who live nearby, and the Wasco, Multnomah, Yakima, Tualatin, and Molalla peoples who traveled to Willamette Falls each year to trade for fish and fish for salmon, which sustained them for months. This congregation's story begins when some people from Oregon City decided to form a church as an alternative to the two creedal churches present at the time, the Roman Catholic and the Methodist churches. At the time, the Presbyterians and Congregationalists were quite cooperative, but the Presbyterians were moving towards a central system of control, and afraid of the building falling under the control of the presbytery. Less than 10 years later, the congregation voted to disband and reform as the First Congregational Society of Oregon City. Our minister at the time was the Reverend George Atkinson, an Andover-trained minister who was working for the American Home Missionary Society, who had planned to go with his new wife to be a missionary in Africa. But after missing their boat due to his ordination, it was a long time ago. Things were different. They were persuaded to come west to the Oregon Territory. Reverend Atkinson was the minister from 1849 to 1866 before taking a call in Portland. And during his tenure here, the congregation built its first building down on Main Street. In the 1880s, the congregation had outgrown its home and so raised the money to greatly expand the building they occupied, incorporating the existing building into the back of the church. The new sanctuary sat 350 with room for a few hundred people in the older part. When Reverend Atkinson died in 1889, it seemed fitting that the new building be named to honor him. And so the building was dedicated as Atkinson Memorial Church. But interestingly, the congregation became the First Congregational Church of Oregon City. Tragedy struck on February 4th, 1923, when the church caught fire and burned to the ground. The congregation wanted to rebuild, but chose this spot up on the bluff rather than what had become an overcrowded Main Street. They purchased the land for $7,000, and began having services in the Carnegie Library across the street, back when the Carnegie Library was just the little brick building. The combination of a grant from the Home Society and the sale of the Main Street property and pledges meant that they had almost $28,000 to spend on the building. And the lowest architectural bid came in at $45,000. So they needed to gather more money, and they did. And in the end, this building, which we occupy today, cost a grand total of $72,781.73, including land, carpeting, pews, and the Povey Brothers stained glass windows. We will celebrate the 100th anniversary of this building in September. In many ways, this building represents the roots of this congregation. In the past 100 years, we've moved from being First Congregational Church of Oregon City, which is still the name on the china downstairs, if you look at it, to Atkinson Memorial Congregational Church, after a merger with a congregation from Portland who wanted to retain their name, and it was a name that we still had deep connections to, so we decided that would be okay. We didn't join the merger of most congregational churches with another denomination to become the United Church of Christ in 1948. Because the United Church of Christ at that time had both a Trinitarian creed and an authoritative structure, and we were the oldest free church west of the Rocky Mountains, and we were not about to let go of that free church moniker. We survived a split in the 1960s when a group of people wanted to get rid of the minister and become a fellowship instead. The vote was 86% to 14%. But that 14% was about 40 people, and they left, and they started South Park UU Fellowship. And we survived a stretch in the 1990s when this congregation was down to about 45 people on a Sunday, with almost no children, and mostly older congregants who couldn't take care of the building. Nobody could get up on the roof anymore. At that point, we merged with Boone's Ferry congregation, also a small congregation, and this one had been planted by First Unitarian Church of Portland that had lots and lots of young families with children. They had no building, and they were running out of money to pay a minister, and they were in danger of folding. But their quarter-time minister, the Reverend Tim Haley, got called as the minister of Atkinson Memorial and said, "Hey, maybe y'all could come here." And the two congregations merged, and it was a win-win. Atkinson had this beautiful building and a minister, and Boone's Ferry had young families with children, and they brought with them their dowry, which was enough to recarpet the sanctuary in this carpet that we see right here, and refinish the floors in the dome room and downstairs. Our congregation's roots allowed for an influx of wings. 10 years after that, this congregation embarked on a capital campaign to build the new wing, to get our kids into classrooms instead of closets. That area back up there on the balcony, that was an RE classroom. And to make our building accessible. As you might imagine, a capital campaign that ran from 2008 to 2010, anyone remember what was going on then? Meant that we did not get as much money as we had hoped. But we still got the beautiful new wing and the atrium and the elevator. We got what we needed. Between 2013 and 2015, this congregation went through another rough patch. The Reverend Dana Warsnop had left, and we had a bad experience with an interim minister. It became clear that we were floundering financially. We had to make sure that the collection was deposited before staff could cash their paychecks. The leadership and congregation made the really difficult decision to keep a full-time minister and cut our director of religious education and office administrator to half-time, a decision that lost us valuable and beloved staff members. And some folks are still hurt and angry about that. Jerry Spriggs led a refresh team in the time before I arrived, and one of their projects was to consider a name change, one that embraced our Unitarian Universalist identity. We had dropped the congregational affiliation in the early 2000s, and it was time to be more open about who we were. The story that I love and hate at the same time is that one of our members was across the street at the library and heard someone talking to the librarian and saying, "Gosh, I really wish there was a Unitarian Universalist church in town." And the librarian, who worked across the street, said, "Yeah, wouldn't that be great?" It was time to be more open about who we were. In January of 2016, the congregation took a vote to become the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Willamette Falls. And this was a hard vote. There were older people who had been coming to Atkinson for decades and didn't want to change the name. There was a youth who wanted to keep the name to avoid discrimination that they worried would come with being identified as a Unitarian Universalist in what is a fairly conservative town. There were folks who didn't want to change because they wanted a church in conservative Clackamas County that was more stealth. Well, their neighbors weren't going to tell them that they were going to hell because they went to church, and from the outside, Atkinson looked like any other church. That vote passed by 76% to 23%. And the thing that I am the most proud of is how we conducted that vote. There was no triumph or jeering. And to the best of my knowledge, we did not lose a single member over the name change. That felt like the most important victory. We have been through tough times as a congregation, including dwindling numbers and an aging congregation. This is a test that's been hitting so many Unitarian Universalist congregations, as well as so many mainline Protestant denominations everywhere in the United States, as the competition for families' time on a weekend has heated up. When I was a kid, my elementary school had a volleyball team and a basketball team and a track team. Sports are not provided as part of school anymore in the younger grades. And so soccer and baseball games often happen on Sundays. And families are rushing so hard during the week that they are craving downtime together. And COVID disrupted so many of our regular patterns. It took a year and a half after reopening to in-person worship again for our numbers to rebound back to where they were. But we are also deeply craving community. We are craving an end to loneliness and isolation. We are craving a place to put our values into action, to make sense of a world that's creeping into fascism. We are craving a place where we don't have to raise our children in isolation. We are craving a place where we are more than our phones and our shopping habits. We are craving a place where we can make a difference in our neighborhoods and create intergenerational communities where all can thrive. We are craving a place that calls us to be our best selves, kinder, more just, and more compassionate, while also inviting us to be our whole selves, queer and straight, trans and cis, old and young, and right in the middle of different races and genders and belief systems. We are people who don't believe that final authority rests in a book written 2,000 years ago. People who question the status quo and what they were taught, and people who want to work together to find the answers and treat their neighbors with dignity and respect. We have so much to be proud of here. We have the best ratio of children and youth to adult members in the state, and one of the best in the country in a Unitarian Universalist congregation. I am frickin' proud of that. We have great energy here and are full of wonder and love. We feed hungry people and we treat our unhoused neighbors with dignity and respect. And there is so much more that we could do. I don't know if you know, but there's a pretty big election coming up in November that has a whole lot riding onto it, like the survival of democracy. Climate change is real and it is affecting us a whole lot. We have people sleeping in our literal doorways, and there is no other place in Clackamas County for them to go. Unitarian Universalists are known as the people who show up for justice and transformation and love. We showed up for same-sex marriage, and we are showing up now for reproductive rights and trans kids and adults and climate justice. And I know that sometimes you just need rest and community and an hour a week of inspiration. And sometimes you want to go out and cause good trouble. What we do here, what we do now, will make the difference between Unitarian Universalist congregation at Willamette Falls being here in 100 years or not. It is worth supporting this congregation. It is worth it to make sure that our kids have a space to learn about relationships and other religions, and that it's okay to ask questions and get them answered. It is worth it to have groups where our caretakers are nurtured so they can nurture others. It is worth it to have beautiful music and meaningful stories and other people to do the work of justice with. Feels like all that stuff should be free, doesn't it? It's not. It costs us about $350,000 a year to maintain this place, to pay our staff and to keep the lights on and to pay for insurance and the mortgage on the new building and dues to the UUA. But my friends, together, we can do so much. We can make this world a better, more kind, more just place. We have to want it, and we have to value it, and we have to pay for it, and the only way we can do that is to do it together. May it be so. Blessed be and amen.